Thanks. So welcome. The good news, it's almost over. Thank you, Hala and Sonia, for this invitation to try out a few ideas in this, what was supposed to be a round table, but unfortunately our third participant, Sarah Giannini, was unable to join us due to a severe illness in the family, so we wish her well. And so accordingly we tried to reframe the roundtable conversation into more of a presentation of the recent work of artist Vartan Avakian, who, at least to my mind, is one among the slightly younger generation of artists, whose work I find conceptually very rigorous and formally very inventive, so I'm very happy to be, in a sense, prefacing with my text his work. So what we will do today is I will read a text that I wrote for this occasion, a short text, which I think sets the stage for a presentation by Datum of his recent work. I will ask him a few questions, have a conversation, but of course we will try to open it up and maybe find again the round table, much larger. All right. Actually, I should say a few things though, because let me just say a few more things, which is that what brings us here, I mean, even as Sarah is not with us, but what motivated this roundtable is, again, a kind of an interest in thinking through some of the questions that are becoming more and more compelling, questions that are prompted by new technologies. And Vartan's work is very much involved in thinking these new technologies, as his work, I think, tries to stage a kind of interface between, if you allow me, or I would call mortal durations and amortal durations. My text, as you will see, probably belongs to an earlier epoch, but I made an effort to reach him. Let's see if that works out. Right. So it nearly happened, but then again, it did happen. We knew that it would eventually happen, no matter the delays and the cunning postponements. But when it was announced that it would soon happen, that is, before it nearly happened, I tried to wish it away like an unsavory lie, as Arabs say, or as a foul-smelling fish, to mimic the French, or a downright foolery, to speak English. But when this last 1st of April was bluntly announced as the day when the Beiruti daily As-Safir would shut down, I heard the door slam on an epoch and was left with the acerbic palate of someone who had been watching that door slamming in slow motion for many years. April Fool's Day came and went. With the death foretold, the daily As-Safir survives. A new issue, folded crisp, can again be bought every morning. That the daily's obituary will again be written as something I am damned with knowing. That the door will slam again is inevitable. But what I seek to know, now that an astringent palate has pricked my tongue, is no longer when the terminal shutdown will happen, no longer when will a daily newspaper die, but rather, I'd like to know, how does the language die? How will the disappearance of daily printed speech acts come to withdraw from sociality the virtual presence of what is, according to semiology, an incommensurable language? I asked these questions, these extreme questions, under duress, for that inimical sound of the slamming door had me falling through the superficial mourning for printed pages and further down into successive memory recesses towards the fascinating but also daunting question of how does a language die? So it happened nearly 3 years ago, in my car listening to the French public radio service broadcast on Radio Lebanon. I happened on an interview with a French philosopher who works on the intersection of Islam and existentialism. The philosopher spoke learnedly. He answered the questions of the sympathetic journalist generously and patiently. The conversation pushed along, pleasant but uneventful, until later in the interview when the journalist inquired about the philosopher's knowledge of the Arabic language. His answer was consistent with his apparent erudition. He studied Arabic to access texts in their original language. And what is Arabic for you? The journalist asked. L'arabe c'est mon latin. Arabic is my Latin. I never did search for that philosopher's book, nor did I retain much from the broadcast interview, besides that one devastating answer. My qualification of the answer as devastating does not regard the philosopher, for he is one who seems to tranquilly think and write in French. I will refrain from equally proposing that he dreams in that same language. In French, a language that thrives in its land of origin and in other lands and minds, some colonized, others seduced, even if the distinction is not always clear. A French language that flourishes in the twisting of non-native tongues and through the many Frenchies who speak otherwise. But if you were to linger with the philosopher's reply, we can gather that he writes in French because he has a Latin, a language he visits and minds, a dead, or perhaps a slumbering language, yielding thickness, like a downy pillow on which he retires his head to dream and regress to a world of pulsating etima. But the philosopher's dead Latin, I wanted to shout, but to whom? Is my Arabic. His answer, unbeknownst to him, was devastating to me. Now I have come to learn that what sharply percusses our subjectivities often does so because we are already water longing for turbulence. And so from that dreaded April Fool's Day to the philosopher's answer, I slipped down another recess and into another memory of driving, yet again, many years ago, in a car with the novelist Ilyas Khouri. I remember feeling uneasy in his heavy presence, but still attentive to his words. That evening, driving to his apartment, the recalcitrant novelist seemed uncharacteristically vibrant, very eager for what his writing is promising next. I remember feeling puzzled by the novelist's temperament, for that evening must have occurred nearly 20 years ago, when the literary supplement of the daily An-Nahar, which was edited by Ilyas Khouri, was already showing signs of fatigue, even if it continued to be a locus of critical writing and political resistance to the Hariri reconstruction project, and also was waxing increasingly vocal about the Syrian dominance in Lebanese local affairs and foreign policy. But driving along, the novelist was animated by something very unlike the zeal of those daily battles, mostly lost, waged by him and by what remained of left-wing intellectuals on the pages of that literary supplement. So I asked the novelist of what motivates him so. His answer was brief but disarming. I'm learning a new language, Syriani, Syriac. And what is Syriani for you? I asked like a sympathetic journalist. And he says, it is a rose whose petals have opened to become Arabic. So I dropped off my older companion, but held on to his answer. which so effortlessly became visual. A dying language, rose-like, going through the agitation of a last reproductive syndrome, opening its petals and somehow transferring its pollen and begetting Arabic. Many years later, and long after its first date of publication in 2002, I picked up Ilyas Khouri's novel entitled Yalo, in which one character, Gabi, a woman who knew Syriac but preferred Arabic, who became wife, daughter, and mother to Ephraim, the aging Syriac Kohno, which means priest, who gathers her 5 fingers in a fist and then opens them to explain to the narrator how Syriac blossomed into Arabic. And then does the same to Solas, her only son, Yalo, often punished by his grandfather, the Kohno, for failing to memorize Syriac words. Gabi, Yalo, the grandson, and the Kohno seem to live in Khouri's novel with what remains of the rose that begat, the rose forgotten by the new language, the Arabic it begot. Gabi lives in silence, and Yalo mostly yearns to emigrate, but unable to leave, he speaks from within his stuckedness with words he barely understands, borrowed from his grandfather, the Kohno. But sir, Arabic is not our language. Ours is dead. When I want to speak, I feel something dead over my tongue. These were not Yalo's words, certainly not the words he wished he could speak. Rather, they were shards collected from his grandfather, who used to stand below an icon of Christ and to him say, Lord, your language is dead. How could you let your language die? I taste death under my tongue. Who will follow me and pray the way you used to pray? How shall we pray, O Yeshua, when words are dying? I feel worms coming out of them, as if my mouth has turned into a graveyard. Possessed by his dying language, the Kohno, the priest, seeks the survival of his world in a desperate attempt to teach his grandson Yalo the words that make his world. He frantically grabs the hapless Yalo and tries to show him what words do. He would say, words are eyes. Look carefully at words, my son, then you will know why man merges with reading. You will understand that it is words that look at us, for they see and they breathe. The urgency with which the grandfather lives the waning last days of his spoken and written world is lost on those around him, for he alone realizes, under duress, that he has to perform the impossible and learn to read what has been erased. So again, we must learn to read the erased. We must learn to read the erased words. This is our story. We are a people whose story has been erased, whose language has been erased, and if we do not learn to read the erased, all will be lost. Ilyas Khouri's novel develops contrapunctily, but it persisted in my memory monophonically, as one extended allegory on what Arabic has to do if it is to live. Allegorical, the novel told of the death pangs of Arabic through the foregrounded drama of a Syriac that tastes like death. The novel's cosmology proposes that for a language to be begotten by a previous and deadened language is no more than a passing joy, ephemeral as a rose in bloom. But if it is to live and flourish, a begotten language must find its begetter and with it reciprocate. Could it be that the novelist's animated self during that car drive many years ago be caused not so much by him learning a new language, as much as by a recognition of his newly found Latin? But if so, then what does the novel Yalo tells us about this asymmetrical reciprocity between the dead that begets and the begotten that lives with the dead. How do the dead and the living cohabit? In related passages dispersed over many pages of the novel, we read of the Kohanos' persistence in initiating Gabi and Yalo into the miraculous honey-sweet seawater on the night of the Epiphany. Each year on the 6th of January, Gabi and Yalo follow the Kohana to the beach at Ramlet al-Bayda and there prepare for the reappearance of the spirit that long ago revealed its chosen son when baptized in the waters of the river Jordan. Wading in the waves facing Ramlet al-Bayda, the Kohno, Gabi and Yalo walk to meet the spirit and drink honey from the briny sea. My son, the Kohno spoke, the sky is the sea extended, and the sea is the mirror of the world. This particular story in the novel, I find, is thematic of the frustrated search for reciprocity between the two languages. But if the impassioned words of the Kohno are repeatedly lost on his son, it is because, I think, a dead or dying language cannot initiate that sought-after reciprocity. The Kohno's words, struggling to enchant one world with the words of another language, another world, fail to be transformative. Rather, at least in the novel, they seem to imbue the zealous speaker and the nonplussed listeners with a profound melancholy. It is most probably indication that one's quote-unquote Latin remains mute until it is chosen by a living language, but only in as much as a language that is living well must have already chosen its Latin. Khoury's novel is troubled, to say the least. Many forces disallow the reciprocity between the living and the dead, civil war being one. Accordingly, what the novel Yalo does is disturb the apparent effortless accessibility of one's Latin, of one's chosen Latin, as suggested by the French philosopher's answer, and by the animated self of the novelist himself when asked about what Syriani was for him. In the novel, the dying Syriac seems so imbrued or stained with the larger contaminating death of post-war sociality, so much so that any wished-for cohabitation between dead and living appears as unlikely as science fiction. And so down into one more recess, another memory, into the maze-like structure of William Gibson's cyberpunk novel, Neuromancer, where I remember reading a description of an impossible cohabitation filtered through the biocybernetic terminology of immersive virtual technologies. The passage I recall from that novel concerns the novel's anti-hero, Case. He was a drug addict, a cyberspace cowboy, a hacker, a very good hacker, who wires this little gadget they call SimStim, which is abbreviation for simulation stimulation, who wires a SimStim deck into his computer and with it accesses the sensorium of his partner, Molly, who's a razor girl, that's what she's called, with many biocybernetic modifications, including an enhanced reflex system, and implanted mirrored lenses covering her eye sockets, and outfitted with added optical augmentations. I'm going to read a relatively long excerpt from that novel. So Case sat in the loft with the dermatrodes, he puts on his head, strapped across his forehead. A countdown was in progress in one corner of the monitor screen. He thought that cowboys, cyber cowboys, didn't get into SimStim because it was basically a meat toy, a gratuitous multiplication of flesh input. But 1 and 2, and then cyberspace slid into existence from the cardinal points. Then he keyed the new switch, the abrupt jolt into other flesh. Matrix gone, a wave of sound and color, and then he finds himself inside Molly. Okay. He says she was moving through a crowded street, past stalls vending discount software, prices felt penned on sheets of plastic, fragments of music from countless speakers, smells of urine, free monomers, perfume, and patties of frying krill. For a few frightened seconds, he fought helplessly to control her body, then he willed himself into passivity, became the passenger behind her eyes. The glasses didn't seem to cut down the sunlight at all. He wondered if the built-in amps compensated automatically. Blue alphanumerics winked the time, low in her left peripheral field, showing off, he thought. Her body language was disorienting, her style foreign. She seemed continually on the verge of colliding with someone, but people melted out of her way, stepped sideways, made room. "How you doing, Case?" He heard the words and felt her form them. She slid a hand into her jacket, a fingertip circling a nipple under warm silk. The sensation made him catch his breath. She laughed, but the link was one way. He had no way to reply. I will resist falling into another memory recess. I wish to stay in this ring of my descent and from it start my anabasis. From the dizzying terminology of cyberpunk writing, the cohabitation, or rather inhabitation, of Molly and Case proposes what I think is a non-oratic tandem figure. Case, who accesses the sensorium of Molly, must will himself into passivity or otherwise jack out. Molly, who hosts Case, is playful with her guest, erotically extending her own sensorium into his. Case feels her words as he hears them. That is, he not only hears what she says, but is also present at their germination. Still, Case is not fully immersed in her, for he notices that Molly's glasses do not dim the sunlight, and so what she sees is not equal to what he sees, as her built-in amps must automatically perform for her only some level of compensatory shading. Molly and Case, through the curious gizmo of SimStim, are a tandem figure liberated from the aura of the predecessor, the aura of that sort of deadness still able to generously respond to a caller. The stand-up figure is non-oratic in that the authority of an original is abandoned for the eroticism of a non-symmetrical reciprocity. It is also non-oratic in that if unjoined, will not break into a copy and an original. The tandem figure exists only as such and cannot be weakened by nostalgia for a previous stage. If this is science fiction, then it would be generative for us to remember, following Frederick Jameson, that this literary genre does not imagine the future, as much as visualize a futurity based on a present relieved of its negativities. Now, what negativities prohibit Tocqueville from showing his grandson the obvious transfiguration of the Mediterranean's briny water into a honey-sweet drink every 6th of January may be many. But the point is that for a language to live, it cannot assume the privilege of resurrecting a dead or slumbering language, nor can it simply wait for a slumbering language to occasionally transfigure through unexpected eruptions its own lethargic and solitary existence. Rather, what the ludic bio-cybernetic fiction offers us is a model for a tandem figure of asymmetrical erotic reciprocity, an inhabitation that maintains the marker of a temporal succession, but proceeds towards an eroticism that abandons the erotic evaluation of that which came first. Perhaps. But for now, I must say that around me a language is slowly dying, and to the dominant practice of archiving and its many dutiful practitioners, I raise this other tandem figure for which briny water can taste sweet as honey, but also a tandem figure that may walk forth hand in hand, but not necessarily towards its own extinction. With that, I'd like to now introduce Bertrand Avakian, who actually I mean, I know Vartan, I knew him for many years, but a year ago he came to give a workshop to students in the studio art program at the AUB. And he shared with us a work he has been doing on what he calls biological debris. So, please.
So, I will attempt to start from where we left us, which is things that sound science fiction, and I'll come back to where we are now. Hopefully, the journey will appear atemporal enough to feel that there is no space for science fiction beyond our own time, hopefully. So, I will probably start by reading one more time, stealing from his text. We must learn to read the erased, and if we do not learn to read the erased, all will be lost. It's from Yale. In the last couple of years, I've been planning in my head a series of works under the title All That Is Seen and Unseen, whereby I look at different sites for biological debris. And these sites are mainly three kinds of sites. Sites of history, like monuments, memorial sites, landmarks, sites of pilgrimage. The second kind of site is the body as a repository of biological debris. And the third series of sites are objects. And today I will talk mainly about books and photos. So generally the premise of the work is that these sites have biological debris, and biological debris actually are multi-layered, almost palimpsests of data that can be mined for possible study. So I will begin with an anecdote of my own. I returned to Beirut in December 2013 after spending 3 to 4 years abroad. And I managed to keep the same apartment by some cunning planning, subletting to people, and always believing that I never left, so I kept coming back. On my return, I discovered that two of my collections were in bad shape, were actually destroyed. My plants and my books. I'm not an avid collector generally, and however, I had these two things that I've been in a way collecting, so to speak. So both were damaged by water. The plants were dying because the main source for water in my apartment was a well dug for the building, like it's common here, and it had been contaminated by seawater, which is another very common phenomenon now in Beirut. So they were dying because of salt. As for my small library, which I had packed in boxes, a series of floods had damaged them. So I decided not to plant. That was easy. And I learned that, well, water is not just water. It's always contaminated with other chemical and biological presences. So it wasn't the same water that destroyed both my collections. I was, of course, saddened by this. So I started to think, what was it I was losing with these destroyed books? Was it knowledge? Was it property? Was it a different kind of relationship to objects beyond their functional and utilitarian value? as I looked through my destroyed books, the object itself was still very much there. Actually, its cultural presence as an object was even stronger. You know, they were swollen and they had become an object. So it's not the object. And my library was and still is very modest. It doesn't hold rare books or manuscripts. Everything I had could be easily bought again. And actually I had them all as PDFs. I have more books than I need as PDFs. And so it wasn't that. And now when I think about what I had in this selection, I remember a couple of books. There was a book about minimalism in music, which I felt was very important for me. I'll tell you why later on. So it's not the content itself. There was volume 1 of Capital, like you should have in your library. I had an early translation in Arabic of Last Temptation of Christ, that I remember, that I also lost. And also a photo book of Water Towers by the German photographers, Becker, yeah. So, and these books, these are the books that I still remember I had. And I mainly had them because not of the script. So it wasn't the content itself, it was some additional associational values that I had with them, the stories that they held for me. So I'll tell you, for example, the story of the first book, Minimalism. Talk about 4, I think, main composers. Steve Reich, one of them, I think, and Philip Glass, and 2 others. And it was a book around which I built a friendship with my friend Ra'ad Yassin. That's how we met. We became friends, we discussed art early at the turn of the century. And when he had to leave Lebanon, he had all his books in boxes, and because he's also very cunning, he sold them. He made money to be able to go to Holland. And then a lovely woman who loved me at the time went and bought this book and brought it to me. So it was a nice gesture. It was the symbol of our friendship. So it wasn't the book itself. So it wasn't the script, it was the book. And so, yeah, in Arabic, from our discussion, it wasn't الكتاب هو النص، كان المصحف هو المهم. And I knew I need to do something with my library that survived, because I didn't want to lose it again. So I started to work with a biochemist to find ways to preserve my library and not lose it. Meanwhile, I had a chance to work on another project that is also built on biological debris, and I'll probably show you that first. So it's not in the order I want, it's fine. So I'll show you this example because I won't show you pictures from the recent work. This is a similar work on photographs. And this is a piece called Suspended Silver, and whereby I looked at 10,000 negatives found at Beirut, the building that is going to be a museum for the history and memory of the city. And there was a photo studio there with 10,000 negatives that were retrieved. They were in very bad shape, as you see. And simply what I decided to do is to clean them. And if you see the debris collected on them is dust, which is mainly biological debris, most dust is, and also debris from the film itself, because when we clean them, if you see the missing white space, is actually the fallen silver halides on which the image appears actually. So I basically collected these lost, if you want, physical pixels. Again, you see, so from the dust I collected, we mined for silver, which was supposed to be in these empty places. And I've created a series of photographs from these collected, from this exposed silver. I promised to show this work last minute at the request of Walid, because it shows you how the material transformation of a certain medium that holds information can be another medium that holds other layers of information. So in a way, I look at these books as data carriers, as I think Dr. Beatrice Grundler at the first day called books carriers of data on Thursday. So which layers of data I was interested in keeping, in retrieving. So just like now we erased hard disks because we need more space and the medium itself is expensive, silicon wafers are expensive, so we clean them and write again on them. It was also common practice in early manuscripts. We see here a very clear example of a palimpsest of a parchment that was first inscribed with Armenian text, I think in the 6th century, then cleaned, deleted, and written on it again in the 10th century with Syriac. But with new technologies, we were able to retrieve, not very new actually, but we were able eventually to retrieve this latent, dormant layer of data. And this is actually similar to what we can do now with hard disks. So even if you have some things you think you've deleted from your phone, one day someone will be collecting hard disks and retrieving information. Another famous example is the Archimedes palimpsests, whereby it was deemed more important to reveal this lost text than the newer text. So in a way, I'm trying to justify that sometimes there are other layers of information that if you think are worth preservation, it's fine to destroy some other material foundation for other data. I will give you now like an overview of my library as to books I have a special affinity to. And it all started, I think, with this book. This is a Bible from my great-grandmother who passed away when I was 12, and my family saw that it was destroyed, and like logically people said, we are throwing this away. And at the time I said, no way, I'm keeping this, and I kept it. And now I'm thinking, why do I need it? This is the wrong, a book I bought as a gift, but never delivered. A book that isn't that interesting in itself, but the journey to find it was very fascinating. Somehow I can't see the rest. Let me scroll the other way. Sorry. So now I'm getting a preview of how this will end.
Can you still read your text like this? Because then we can
Yes.
see the images better.
Yes. A book borrowed from a friend, which I never intended to return. a Quran given to me by a friend for the memory of her father. I just like this because it's from the time when I worked in a brothel and someone gave me a book. I love it. A book sent to my great-grandfather by his brother, a book printed in Uruguay that finally gives me proof that the village they told me they came from exists, because it's not there anymore, and apparently all the stories they told me are true, and there's a book about it. It even has a map of how they fought the Ottoman forces. This is the map of resistance. A lovely woman wanted to buy me the etymological encyclopedia of Ajarian, which I really like, but she got me the wrong dictionary. A book left by someone who just stayed for a night at my place. And the last one is when I decided not to be an engineer anymore, I started to look more into literature. And a girlfriend at the time told me, you should read this book. I took it out from the library and returned it, and then we fell in love. So I went and got the book because I wanted to read a physical book, and paid a fine because I told him I lost it. So I lied and did everything to get this book because I wanted the book itself, not the script. It's from LAU. So, my project now with these books is very simple. I want to separate what is generic and reproducible, and collect what remains. And a lot remains. It looks minimal, but a lot remains. The very early experiments of just developing fingerprints from these books was very simple and eventually boring. But what fingerprints that you can develop from books remind us is that there is biological debris. You get fingerprints because of the sweat left, which react to certain chemicals. So basically I want to collect this additional material accumulation that makes my relation to these books, let's say, special. And I'm working to collect that into small, well-digestible forms, because they're biological and you can carry them with you. And what seemed a very far-fetched and even science fiction in Walid's text, it's not that far away. We are already building hard disks made from synthetic polymers of DNA. The current hard disks, they're available, you can buy them, but the technology is here where you can store an image on synthetic polymer and inject it to yourself and keep it with you, and it can be retrieved. And it stays so much longer than any other medium we know because it's biological. And it's not that alien. And it's not that alien that we will be able to design polymers of DNA that would stick to our own DNA, and possibly, like the rose pattern that opened up and, well, let's say the pollen impregnated the earth with some other flowers, when it's not very far that from what we can do now to be able to impregnate ourselves with these layers of data. And as we live our lives, actually impregnate our environment, because as we walk, we shed our skin, our hair, which contains our DNA. And the current forms I have are small pills like this, Or like, someone was very happy today that there was a real book. There are many books in this Bible which I can ingest. It's not going into my DNA yet, but maybe one day. So, and with this, I end my contribution.
I'm going to ask Bartan one question. Some of what you shared with us reminds me of a very old text. The book of Revelation, or rather known as the Apocalypse. In book 10 of the book of Revelation, in chapter 10, Saint John of Patmos, who until chapter 10 had been privileged with the position of a witness who's simply describing without interpretation the end of the world, but not in any way being affected by it. In chapter 10 he hears a voice, and the voice says unto him, go towards that angel whose head is in the clouds and whatever is made of fire. The angel holds a book in his left hand. Go and eat the book, and the book will taste like honey to your mouth, but be bitter to your stomach. So St. John in chapter 10 of the book of Revelation leaves his privileged position as a witness, and then walks into, I suppose, the apocalypse, and is fed the book. And he says, it tastes like honey to my mouth, but bitter to my stomach. And then chapter 11, he goes back, as if nothing had happened, to his previous position as the privileged witness. But, if we take books seriously, I think we should. You seem to think of St. John of Patmos from chapter 10 on to chapter 20 as, the English expression goes, as someone, as a man with a book, as you say, a woman with a child. Right? But it's a book that he hasn't read. It's a book whose consequences he's completely, he's not in control, right? When the impregnation will evolve into a delivery of some sort. It's something to think about. But so, you've just drank your library.
Right.
Yeah. And I believe you. Have you not, you've impregnated yourself, and since you have no idea what the consequences will
It does taste bitter.
be. Yeah, it's your mouth.
No. That's just the result of one experiment. It's not my library.
Can I have them?
There's stuff. It's okay. It tastes bitter. What I want to say is, I believe, as I hinted at the end, it's not an issue of having the book and delivering it, in as much as in order not, maybe you have to lose the book totally so that you can never lose it. So in a way, if it's in your system and you shed it, its presence is preserved without you willingly doing so. And the fascination or obsession many times with artists and other people and writers to leave a trace, which I totally understand, should be always read with the knowledge that we leave traces all the time without necessarily willing to do so. So in a way, it is, yeah, the process is about liberating my relationship with this library from the object itself, but also liberating it from me being its collector. So I don't know if I'm collecting it to deliver it eventually, or it's just, yeah, is that clear?
No, yeah, I mean, it's clear, it's, yeah. But I suppose, I mean, we know in a sense that memory has a material matrix. That's one reason why we forget. In a sense, you are re-inscribing a memory in matter again, but for you it is sub-microscopic, whatever. But what's happening here is, what's unusual is that although, you know, what Derrida calls, you know, this was the archive fever, that in a sense, which is symptomatic of our fear of death and mortality, we're trying to archive everything, make everything perennial, right? But still, nevertheless, as mortals, you know, so far we are still mortals, although we're being told that soon enough that's going to be just a little accident that can be overcome. But so far we are mortal. In a sense, the memory that we hold in our material being, to a large extent, ends with our death. What you're doing is, in a sense, you're suddenly creating a décalage, a bifurcation, right? We are suddenly mortal creatures who carry material, that carry data, that will outlive us. And will outlive us forever, it seems. So
yes, yes, I'm not doing it, I'm just, the work reminds that this is happening. This is happening. That's
Is
how
it?
I see it.
Huh.
Yes, well, any, the premise of all the work is that any kind of data is an inscription on material, from DNA to parchments, to vinyl records, and to solid state hard disks, and through everything we think about that has an inscription, it's inscribed on natural, on material, it's all natural, but it's a different story. On material, it has a material foundation, and this foundation, it's beyond our temporality. It's beyond our mortal temporality. Not only as individuals who live 100 or 80 years, but even beyond human mortality. And to give a concrete example from something very, very mundane is, for example, if we look at e-readers on which we have now a lot of text, it's not illogical for us to devise ways to reveal eventually all these palimpsests of text that once were on the screen itself. And this is something that we've already seen in the 90s and in the years 2000s with screens having what they call burns. Like if you have a TV screen, for example, with games, arcade games, because there was one pattern, let's say in Pac-Man, that pattern was always lit with a diode. So even after you shut it down, there is material trace of the pattern. Or with new LCD screens, if you put them, and if you have one in, I don't know, some TV station, they do it in TV stations where they have, for example, BBC all the time, after 5 or 3 to 5 years, even when you put it on another channel, you keep seeing the BBC logo, because it is latent exactly like with palimpsests on parchment. Even when you clean it, there is a material trace in it. And these traces we can mine for. There are things we know we can mine for now, and there are things, now I'm talking only about biological debris and DNA that they can know how we look, what kind of disease we have, but there are so many more layers of information that can be unmined that are beyond our human story. So it's beyond this temporality. And already in our own DNA, which you can only decode 2% of, these DNA polymers that now we decode, it's only 2%, it is the same script from the animals that were before us. It's the same, it's a transcribe of the same script. So, and it is happening on material.
Okay.
The project or the work only reminds us of it.
So at some point we humans were described, at least in one particular religious notion, as ashes to ashes. Now it's data to data. But in that sense,
no, it's the ashes that hold data.
Right. That's actually, we have to correct data to data. So, but in that sense, if I may challenge you here, how is your work a critique, or perhaps there's not a critique of this fever of archiving, of this fear of mortality?
Well, I don't think I thought of it as a critique, but I know that, and maybe it is a project of archiving, but that would be not what I wanted to do at all, because I don't collect things normally. I'm not very much interested in keeping things like exactly the way they are. So the project was in a way, for me to actually destroy the material, destroy the objects that are being collected normally. Like, I don't want to work with the photographs that were found in Beirut, Beirut, in the photographs themselves. I'm not interested in them. I'm not interested in keeping the books themselves as a collector. So, in a way, it was engaging with, I thought, anti-archiving practices. But someone can say, but since you're telling us that even your act of doing this could be retrieved maybe from the material that you've created, then it is an act of archiving. I don't think so. If someone collects my work and tries to get this kind of data from it, he will be archiving the work.
Please, questions, comments, if you wish.
So what do you, where do you keep this little bottle?
No, it's empty.
Yeah, where do you keep it?
Actually, it's a bottle for something else.
Yeah.
So
But
I don't keep the bottle itself.
Now you throw it away?
No, I keep it. No, I can put shampoo in it next when I'm traveling. So it's not about. It had before, I think, vitamin D.
Vitamin D.
But I like the size, so it was practical.
But you're keeping the bottle. You're keeping something.
Yeah. Anyway, I found it. I used it. Yes.
I have a comment and the question related to the comment. I mean, first of all, we can approach collecting from a different angle, not this fever of participating in possession, but rather like what Benjamin was, the way Benjamin was conceptualizing is that you take objects out of circulation, which is the opposite of the capitalist incessant circulation of objects. Which is going to come back to the common grounds of your interventions. I think if Walid is talking about the question of survival after the death of language, your practice somehow comments on the afterlife of the species as such, because when something enters a museological regime, right, and I mean you do produce works out of this debris. They're really meticulously installed as museum artifacts in a very conscious way. And that which enters a museological regime also marks the death of the depth of something, and it looks to me what the depth that is being captured in your sculptural objects that also encapsulate all this data that we're talking about is both the depth of time, historical time, and also the depth of species. So I'm wondering, where do we go from this apocalypse? The depth of the species and the depth of language. Did you think of, those who would? I mean, are there those who will be the recipients of this data in the future, or this is not a question that figures in your practice?
Well, you said the depth of time, or in a way, yes, I think of these material as outside how we look at time, how we understand time socially as humans. Maybe I'm at fault that I do this consciously. I have to think more about it. I produce artifacts thinking that they'll be collected, and thus I'd like to think I'm creating, this is only for me, objects for future archaeology. I found it is really fills me with excitement to produce a work that I don't know what kind of data it has. So it is consciously making, I give this example maybe in your class, like when a craftsman used to make a small kilim, they knew that it had some utility, even if it's for decoration. They knew maximum that it would hold their signature as craftsmen, and people will be able to get these layers of information from it. They didn't know at the time that people would be looking at it to study the history of dyes, the history of diseases in cattle and sheep. So there's something that fascinates me to make works of art that I don't grasp totally. I say this better in Arabic. غير محيط فيهم. Maybe someone gives a better translation. So, to do an artifact, I call them artifacts that look nice enough to be collected, to go into museums and institutions, and to stay there. And someone will come one day and look at it and not care about the artwork itself or who made it, but discover something else, to mine it for other layers of data that are beyond us all.
So on the same line, interesting you bring up, Derrida and archive fever. I have to say, I've always hated that text. It just seems absolutely wrong, right? It's got, in the sense that it's so obvious, right? I'm collecting something because I'm scared I'm dying. That can't be, that's not worthy of a Derridian convoluted insight, right? And so I'm really interested in what you're saying about that. That doesn't, you're not thinking of death anywhere in that. Just the end you were saying, that it's...
No, not my death or your death, no, not this temporality. It is like my lifespan, my generation's lifespan, the 21st century, no, it's not there. And, no, I'm not thinking about that kind of temporality.
Right.
But I suppose this data is in a sense an attempt to it's an attempt to extract and give form to data suspended outside of a kind of a historical intentionality, right? So we make a carpet to sleep on it. But if you take that intentionality away, what is left of the carpet that could be given another intention? I suppose in that, but in that sense, I mean, it is quite extreme because the question is that why are we here, right? Am I simply the object from which you would collect biological debris for someone else? there is a kind of a call for condescension in the Christian things, like kenosis. So in a sense, it is anti-historical. There is something of that, at least I think, in your work. It's not good or bad, right? But there is that tendency.
I'd be happy, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to see.
It's not that it's if I may,
Yeah.
anti-historical, but there is a different kind of temporality. I mean, you talk about. I mean, in a sense, these objects become something like the 70s project where a CD was sent to cosmos, right, to tell about our planet with its own cultural diversity and so on and so forth. But these tiny objects that you craft that are supposedly for the future, which is which is not the linear future that is to come, but when you look at them visually, they look like some prehistoric artifacts that were excavated before civilizations, before history as such. So in a way, they bring together post-history and prehistory, but what is interesting is that sort of conjunction of these two temporalities take place again in the regime of the museum, which is where it is possible. This is just a comment.
This is how we are imagining they will have a life, but this is only maybe for the next 100 years. But I'm from Byblos, where apparently it's a very, very old city, and well, we know then. When I was a kid, I used to walk and think like everywhere someone was killed here. When you're a child, there are all these lives beneath you, but which is actually true. But you need this kind of a locus to look into. So we know that everywhere has all of these layers of history of that city, which is 10,000, 7,000 years old. But if you find a small artifact, then this is like a kind of reference that maybe this is where we should excavate. So in a way, in 100,000 years there will be no museums, but maybe there will be as I said, something like an iPhone that people will find only the screen of and retrieve, I don't know, things I'm not very dodgy texts with friends or something. I don't know. They can, like we do now with finding, crafts, artifacts of all sorts. So again, the artifacts we find them in Earth, find them everywhere. We don't find them like they intended to be displayed also. So
this distinction between data and information.
Yes.
For example, I think that maybe what's been sent on those Voyagers things is information. I think I had a conversation with Rada. He insists that this is not information; it's data.
Yeah.
And therefore, it is open for all kinds of manipulations.
Yes, the distinction, I'm not saying it's language-wise true, but the way I like to speak about it is that there are these inscriptions on material, willed or unwilled, and sometimes we make them, sometimes they happen. And these inscriptions are data, mu'tayat. Once they are read, they become information. And the same data can yield different kind of information. And then the information is used in discourse. Again, the same information can be used in different discourses. And this is why I think, or I'd like for the pieces to be ahistorical in the sense that they don't come with their own story. I have the story, it's only with me. So they are ahistorical, is that there is no narrative that comes with them. The narrative comes after this inscription, the data becomes information, and then the information is used. I don't have now the image, but there is a lovely image of an artifact I like. It was called the Disc of Crete. It's this round disc, which is amazing because it's also round like discs. that has inscriptions on it. And we know it says something, but we don't have the cipher to decipher it. So now it's pure data. It's pure code that we can't read. It's like the XML that they were talking about. Maybe in 100 years, or maybe less, we will just look at the code and read it like now people read. And I'm sure there was time when they created alphabet, people looked at it and it was the same as looking at computer code. Eventually we learned it.
Anything else?
Yeah, I thank you both for. I was thinking about how intensely historical this is in the sense that it's a response to a loss. So there's a law there, and two losses you mentioned, one of which immediately stops mattering in the way that you tell the story, right? So the loss of the plants, which are books in the sense that they're objects marked, they're bodies that are marked by a bunch of internal data, which are kinds of different genetic data, but genetic data of the same sorts that our bodies are books in that sense. And they immediately stop mattering. So they died, khalas, now they're dead. And so I want to ask a little bit in your sense. So I'm not worried about another linguistic sense, but if I followed you, the distinction you're making between data and information is that data is sort of a kind of mark on body, whereas information is what happens with that mark on body when it's received by some kind of meaning maker. And so it seems like not all marks on body lend themselves equally to becoming information. And so the marks on the bodies of the books, the biological debris on the bodies of the books, matter more than the biological debris that the plants are in their sort of plant bowls, whatever. I don't know, what do you put plants in? And they're planters. And they matter because of a sense of loss, because there's something that's felt in a particular way that you need to do something with, right? But if that's the case, then isn't there a sense in which the data of the books itself actually was already a bit more information? Aren't they differentially informatable, the books and the plants? And if so, what does it mean then to consume or to remediate the book that it wouldn't mean if you were to try to remediate the plants? What couldn't you do in remediating the plants that you can with the books?
Okay, I will answer this in two ways. First, the plants I had were I'll answer it differently. When an investigator walks into a crime scene, I always use the same example. They know that there is data everywhere that they can collect for their investigation, but they look for good pools of data. So if they find a pool of blood, some semen, urine that they found, or a glass, they think that maybe it has fingerprints, they start there. If they don't find anything, they dust the entire place and take all the debris, all the debris, and look for dead skin in it. So in a way, the plants I had were, for example, I had cherry tomatoes, which actually anyway die every 2 seasons. They weren't a good repository of additional information whereby I had this additional value of association. If it was, let's say, the olive tree my father planted for me when I was born and now it's 38 years old, then maybe in my head it has this additional value, but still it's not a good repository of additional data unless I know that he used to come and hug it every day or whatever. I know the books hold part of the debris of the people that I was associating with the books. So I'm keeping this book because it is related physically. To take always the best example, which is the Bible of my great-grandmother, who walked from the Ottoman Empire during the deportation and came and whatever, right? So it's my great-grandmother. And it has markings by her for passages she likes more than others, so I know that she was holding it. Unless it was the wrong book, you know, but as long as I believe it, if I believe that she was holding it, then that same thing can be transferred into some other object. So that's why the books matter as a good repository of data.
I want to go to something that you said, Waleed, about, and I started thinking about this dyad between dead languages versus quote dead languages versus quote living languages, Latin or Arabic versus French. And I started thinking about various dyads that we've heard throughout this conference, from the oral tradition to the written tradition, from manuscripts to books, now from books to datum. And this got me, really struck home because one of the big dyads that I have in my own work is live performance versus recording. I think many people, the majority of people now no longer experience live performance. Everything is recorded and it's at high quality. It's super high definition sound and we're trying to get the sound better and better and better all the time. But when I think about documenting my performances, while the recording might be the most important document of a performance, it to me is the least interesting document of the performance. To me, the more interesting documents are things that people might talk about my performance, things that stuck in people's heads, written accounts of performances. I'm thinking when Stravinsky had his famous premiere of The Rite of Spring in 1913, I think that if there was a YouTube video of that riot that occurred at the premiere, it would make it so much less interesting than it is now, where the documents are actually people talking about their own experiences with that performance. And so this idea of something replicating something else, I think misses something. Again, going back to what Waleed was talking about, this idea of immersing yourself, connecting with someone else's physicality, and experiencing everything they have, is, to my mind, absolutely no substitute for actually going out and experiencing things. I think there is something lost in the translation from doing versus experience, the translation from oral to written, and even from manuscript to book and book to datum. I think each of those dyads, there are important things about the progression, but there are important things that really get lost in the process. That's just a comment. That's just something that sparked my imagination.
No, thanks. Rico.
Just on another tack, I'm always intrigued, all these discussions about data, it's like, what about lies, right? Are you interested in sending out a pack of lies into untruths into the future? I'm actually thinking, there are several Byzantine texts that for years and years no one could decipher. And then somebody came along and wrote a book about Byzantine magic. And it turns out that a whole lot of these incantations are deliberately garbage, right? So they look like, they're written with Greek letters, but people have been trying to work out what could they possibly mean. And it turns out, I was thinking about the Jabberwocky example from last night, right? So the function of these things is, now, does that count as data, right? You were talking about, in 100 years' time, that Cretan disc. I happen to be looking at that, and to me that looks like some kind of magical incantation that probably means nothing in some ways. Does that count as...
That's data.
That's data, right?
Data, there is no hierarchy of truth. It's not like there is like reality is data and lies aren't. Data is just a code that hasn't been read. Once you read it, it becomes information. You can now, like I've transferred to you a story now that I've drank the remnants of my library. That's the data. You can believe it, not believe it, that's something else. And a lot of artists have worked with false stories, false documents, and it's they are producing not only data in this case, they are producing information and sometimes discourse about reality, falsehood, and so forth.
So I suppose when Vartan gets up a little while, he beat books in motion.
Really, I think.
We're also talking about alchemy and transformation. So, if we're to open your body up after you leave here in 10 minutes or half hour or longer, like the bog people, we could analyze what they last ate and why, for example. And they were rituals. I was taken by your talking about the things under your feet from Bilbo's, for example. So my question to you is, how do you define debris?
You mean biological debris, where I find it?
I'm just asking
Okay.
you a question. Because you've been talking about forensics, that's one kind of debris. You've been talking about recycling knowledge. You've been talking about data. We leave 2 tons of debris from our body every year. That's one debris. What do you think about debris?
Yes, as I said at the very, very beginning, the material foundation of the sculpture works I've been doing the last 3 years is biological debris, which means, which I collect from what people refer to generally as dust, but so it's mainly microscopic dead skin and hair and bodily secretions, and sometimes from a bigger pool of biological debris, which is hair, because hair holds so much more additional information than DNA, like what you've been eating, what kind of drugs you've been taking, and in that case, it is temporal. It's a timeline because they know when you did what. So as I said, I work on 3 kinds of sites: historic sites, where I go and collect dust and take it to the lab and look for biological debris in it. I work on bodies, mainly my body, so I collect hair and skin from my body and do small sculptural works with it. And the third site is objects, and I've shown examples now from photographs and books. And photographs and books as sites where these kind of sedimentation accumulates. So I would have a hunch, for example, that the photographs will have biological debris and also film debris, but then we take it to the lab and analyze it. So it's in a way playing investigator, which is fun. Like, I think I'll find it here, but then we analyze it.
So does knowledge fit in all 3 of those definitions? Does knowledge fit in all 3 of those definitions?
What do you mean? What kind of knowledge?
Literary. Let's try literary knowledge.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I'm trying to understand. I would say yes, because otherwise, yes.
We'll stop there. I've done a lot of work
Yes.
on debris as well,
Ah.
my own performance, so I'm very interested in talking to you later.
It's settled then.
Okay,
Thank
we
you.
can go home.
Yeah.
From the participants to the Moawat Museum, right? And again, thank you
Thank you.
very much. Thank you, everyone.